Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. And, let's just talk about the elephant in the room. Obviously, a big part of what we're going to talk about tonight is the recent merger, the recent coalition, the recent agreement between the Liberal Federal Party here in Canada and the NDP party. I already see Terry's in the comments just saying, I don't remember anyone voting for this. You're not alone in that regards, Terry. We're also going to be touching upon, in essence, some further updates around the Freedom Trucker Convoy and the claims of arson. And we're just going to kind of go way back in the time machine and look back to all those blue check marks and verified news reporters. I probably should use air quotes when I'm talking about the mainstream media legacy press and referring to them as news reporters. But we're going to dive in and just kind of remind ourselves about how many of them wanted to jump to conclusions because this fits so well within their narrative. And now we're seeing, the facts actually come to light. And yet I haven't seen anyone posting any sort of retractions, corrections, or anything like that. We covered the fact that CBC has dialed back on 2 of their articles previously, but not around the arson case that's going on. And then otherwise, I've got a full course of pills for you guys to consume tonight. So we're going to go through the entire list from blue pill, red pill, black pill, clown pill, and then finally end up on the white pill. And so, as I mentioned yesterday, I really would appreciate feedback. So if you guys have any suggestions on how I can improve this show, or if you've got a different take on how I should approach it, let me know. I'd love to get your feedback. We're 47 episodes into the Maple Pill. And, one, I'm very thankful we haven't been canceled yet. Fingers crossed on that front. And 2, I'm going to continuously be focusing on trying to find ways to improve the show. So again, really do appreciate your guys' feedback. But enough of my preamble. Let's jump into it. And while we're going to be talking about Jagmeet Singh in a little bit about the NDP and Liberal merger, let's first just remind ourselves essentially and really appreciate Cosman spending the time to put together this super clip. And there's a link in the video description down below to this story as well as all the stories we're going to be discussing tonight. But yeah, let's just listen to all the different federal politicians that, use the claimed arson case as justification for some of the extreme measures that came into place.
Violence is commonplace. We saw an example of this violence, an attempted arson downtown of an apartment building where people started a fire. When they exited, they taped the door.
And an attempted...
And so, again, I just want to highlight the fact that Jagmeet there said that violence was common. And yet, according to Ottawa's police in their own facts and statements, we actually saw crime reports drop during the Freedom Trucker Convoy protest. And both before and after the fact, we saw crime higher than during the actual protest. So again, this is just gaslighting. This is just straight up lies. And then they use an edge case story, which turns out to not even be factually true. And we covered this way back when, right? Like we pointed out a lot of the absurdities or peculiar circumstances. And I'm going to quickly remind you of some of those. But again, let's listen to the rest of these lying politicians first.
Arson, all of which, Madam Speaker, was caught on video.
It has been an illegal occupation that has been harassing people in residential areas of Ottawa. People don't feel safe in their own homes. There have been reports of attempted arson.
Canadians are also concerned hearing reports of an attempted arson in the lobby of a residential apartment building.
Because we see hate speech, we see illegal acts such as arson.
The incessant honking, the arson attempts.
The incessant honking.
And then again, right there, that was pluralized, right? The arson attempts. First of all, there was only one arson attempt, and it had nothing to do with the Freedom Trucker Convoy. And anyone with more than 1 or 2 brain cells to rub together would have at least wanted to wait until the facts came out to jump to that conclusion, because there's just a lot of things that didn't line up.
The arson attempts.
An attempted arson of a residential building in the occupation area.
We've seen the active sabotage of 911 emergency call lines and even an attempted arson.
Other alleged crimes have even been more egregious. Ottawa police are investigating the attempted arson of a downtown apartment building. The situation persists, fueled in part by foreign funding.
We saw reports of attempted arson in some of the buildings.
And it certainly does not include arson or pushing into a residential apartment building and barricading the exits with handcuffs.
The arrests for conspiracy to murder.
Also, there was no handcuffs. So again, that was fake news.
Attempted arson of a residential building.
Over the past 3 weeks, we have watched assaults, attempted arson.
They have been living in fear that their apartment buildings may be torched by arson.
Seen assaults.
Again, I'm not even going to play all this because I already feel my blood pressure increasing in frustration, but it's wild to see this all put together in a quick compilation highlighting all the different lies and misinformation that our politicians push, and understand the mainstream media back them up full tilt throughout this entire process. And so what I want to highlight next for you guys are two fantastic articles from the Post Millennial. So really appreciate them doing a deep dive on this. The first one here is titled "Liberals Media Spread Hoax That Freedom Protesters Committed Arson Attack on Ottawa Apartment Building. There is no information indicating McDonald was involved in any way with the Convoy protest, which was going on when this arson took place," Ottawa police wrote Monday. And again, we were already discussing that because, I remember things like, oh, that seems weird that it looks like a teenager. It turns out I think he was 21, has purple hair. Not the first thing I would assume that the Freedom Trucker Convoy truckers would likely have is purple hair. But again, didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it just seemed weird, right? Then we had the fact that no one actually reported it, right? So they waited until the next morning to report it. We had someone walk in while they were trying to commit this arson and just ignored them and went up to their apartment. And that's just a quick highlight of some of the bizarreness that was going on. But I really do appreciate the thoroughness here. And one of the things I wanted to highlight was Jonathan Kay essentially documenting a lot of the mainstream media who just jumped to conclusions. They were discussing how they felt sick about this arson attempt, about how the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters were getting out of control. Someone had to do something. Wouldn't someone think of just the peaceful residents in downtown Ottawa? Again, understand, the more you start to look into these things, the more you realize how many false flag operations there are. And I would like to believe Canada experiences this less often than in the United States, where the list is just wild, right? Like whether you look at the mainstream media's gaslighting of the Rittenhouse situation, whether you're looking at Jesse Smollett, right? Again, we can look at just about any protest that erupted in violence in the United States over that, summer of love, I think that some in the mainstream media referred to it. You'll actually realize that pretty much everything that triggered protesters was actually taken out of context by the mainstream media and created a narrative that would be very frustrating if any of their stories were true. It just turns out they weren't. And so again, I encourage you guys to spend a little bit of time here because I think whenever looking at these reporters, these mainstream media news outlets, we need to really start challenging them on this. And I just want to highlight here, like Warren Kinzel, right? So you're saying it didn't happen. Want to talk to my two friends who have a kid and a grandkid in that building. Would they convince you, or is Twitter detective work preferred? Again, this wasn't about saying it didn't happen whatsoever, but it wasn't done by the Freedom Trucker Convoy. And understand that if it was so confrontational, why would they wait until the next day to report it, right? It boggles the mind when you look at this. So again, I encourage you guys to look into it, but again, referring to it as a mass attempted murder, right? And yeah, technically the guy that did it, but this was all being framed as if the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters were responsible, when it's just not the case. So there's another article here from Post Millennial, which again just highlights some of the different facts that at the time we discussed here on the Maple Pill as the story was breaking that just didn't make a lot of sense, right? Again, the purple hair thing, looking at the fact that someone walked in on them while they were doing this and just went up to their apartment. The fact that it wasn't reported until the day after, and that it was first reported on Twitter before being reported to the authorities. Just so much of this seems very bizarre, and as if it was done in order to garner as much media attention, as much blame on the Freedom Trucker Convoy as possible. And when you look at things like this, it becomes really easy to start questioning some of the other bad actors or bad actions that occurred during the Freedom Trucker Convoy. The first one that comes to mind for me outside of the arson case is the Nazi flag, right? We had one Nazi flag, we had one Confederate flag, and that was used again by the politicians and the mainstream media to demonize this entire movement. We all have a responsibility, if we want to live in a society that has any grounding in truth and reality, to start calling this shit out more often. So start sharing stories like this more often. Yeah, it may not win you popularity contests at the water cooler. It may not make your friends and family love you more, but I think that we want to at least have some semblance of a grounding in reality here, right? Otherwise, what's the point? Just disconnect, get Neuralink immediately, and go into the Matrix or go into the metaverse and never look back. And you can just concoct your own reality for yourself. Next, just really quickly want to highlight this. I don't want the show to constantly be dominated by the narrative in Ukraine. I think it is important. And one of the reasons I think it's so important is if NATO escalates this situation with Russia, if we get into a hot war, we're absolutely going to see consequences to Canada, right? We're going to see economic consequences. We're going to see consequences as actually having to send over our soldiers to fight in a conflict that I don't see why it needs to be a world conflict when it should really just be a regional conflict. And this is a great article here from Human Events, The Fog of Information War in Ukraine. And essentially just highlighting how the US and the West preemptively started fighting the narrative war before there was ever any sort of hot action on the borders of Ukraine. And this really shouldn't be surprising, right? Like anyone that understands, Project Mockingbird, right? Anyone that looks at past incidences where NATO or the West or America was drawn into these conflicts. In fact, there's a lot of parallels here between what's going on in Ukraine and what happened in actually pick your pick, the first or second Iraq war, probably even more so the second Iraq war, but both of them, seem pretty suspicious. And then switching gears here, let's get into our first blue pill story of the day. And this is going to be talking about the Liberal and NDP merger coalition, or just, a little backdoor agreement to prop up the Liberal government until 2025. But before we even look at the facts about this agreement that the NDP's made with the Liberals, let's look at this tweet from Jagmeet Singh that literally came out, let me do my math here, less than 3 days ago. The system has been rigged by liberals and conservatives to protect the rich and powerful. What if instead of gas prices going up, big oil made less money? What if we had a government with the courage to tax the rich and help Canadians who need it the most? That's what I'm fighting for. So do I understand this correctly, Jagmeet, that either within the last 3 days, the corruption that was rigged by the liberals and conservatives, the liberals decided to no longer participate, and that's why you're now going to back them? Because I guess I'd be surprised that Trudeau moved that fast for anything other than the opportunity to, dress in blackface. So again, it's really hard to understand the messaging here, because I can't imagine that this proposal or this agreement, this coalition, was put together in under 3 days. So again, I just, I guess I'm going to take maybe a contrarian view here to the NDP Liberal merger. I actually think this is overall a good thing, straight up. I debated with myself where to slot it in tonight's course of pills. I actually think it's just a blue pill story because I think it actually accomplishes a lot of things here. One, for people of a similar mindset to myself, it's like, okay, you know what? We see exactly what pieces are on the chessboard now. I understand we're absolutely going to a new world order. We are absolutely going to own nothing by the year 2030, and they will demand that we like it. Maybe that's a little bit hyperbolic, but I don't think it's really that much at this point in time. Secondly, I think that this is the kiss of death for Jagmeet as well as likely the NDP party. Becoming backbenchers of the Liberal Party, I can't imagine that that's what a lot of NDP voters were voting for in this most recent election. I also think that this actually isn't good for the Conservative Party either. But I think it's hopefully very good for parties like Max Bernier's PPC. Right. I think that we're going to see so many boondoggles. We're going to see so many scandals over the coming months and years until 2025 that I think we're going to see a lot more freedom oriented, libertarian oriented, fiscally conservative individuals be radicalized. This is the mainstream media's words here, but be radicalized into the PPC party and start supporting Max. I think it's a net benefit. Let's actually just start preparing our arcs here. Let's start looking for alternative options, whether that's buying your own citadel and moving off grid or disconnecting from the mainstream, whether it's getting the hell out of Canada. I don't blame you at this point either. But I actually, overall, I don't think this is a bad thing. I think it's actually better because it's going to reduce the amount of false hopes we have over the coming months and years. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinions on all this. But first, let's dive into some of the facts before I move on. So this is from Reuters. Factbox, details of Canada's PM Trudeau's deal with NDP to keep power until 2025. And so there actually is a lot to parse out here. So healthcare, and this was released by both parties. They published a list of priorities. Healthcare plan to launch a new dental care program for low-income Canadians starting with under 12-year-olds in 2022. They expand to under 18-year-olds, senior, and people living with a disability in 2023 before a full implementation by 2025. In theory, this sounds good. Let's just get some more free benefits, right, as being a Canadian. But just think about what problems has the government solved recently and how effective and efficient were they? Because honestly, when I try and draw out a list of things that the government's effective and efficient at implementing, particularly the Canadian government, I guess right now my page is blank. Secondly, work towards a universal national prescription drug coverage plan by passing a Canada Pharmacare Act by the end of 2023. Task the National Drug Agency to develop a national list of essential medications and bulk purchasing plan by the end of the agreement. Again, in theory, this sounds good. Pharmaceutical drugs are too expensive, in my opinion. That's coming from a former financial controller of a publicly traded pharmaceutical company that was based out of Canada. However, this isn't the way. This isn't actually going to solve any of these problems. Maybe I'm just too black-pilled on this, but I really do believe that all this is going to do is make it easier for drug companies to prop up their profit margins. I think that if we were really serious about trying to get healthcare costs in line and pharmacare costs in line, we would actually look at challenging some of our complex and Byzantine structures around intellectual property rights, right? Around the ability for these corporations to essentially to copyright different genetic sequencing and understand, like right now, there's drugs that are what's it called? Like not off-label, but essentially like no-name drugs that aren't made by the big corporations, like in India, right? India, you'll find that a lot of drugs actually become no longer protected or like no longer under copyright earlier in India. So, look at a drug like Humira, one of the most expensive drugs. I believe it's the most profitable drug for AbbVie with the highest margin. Well, there's a competitor made by an Indian firm that rolled out in 2018. But here in the West, I don't think I forget if it's rolled out now or it rolls out in a couple of years from now. But understand that it's actually the rules and regulations the government set in place that has allowed these corporations and pharmaceutical companies to create the monopolies they have. And I don't think creating more red tape is going to solve this. And in fact, if I want to be black-pilled on this, I would say that they're going to, in theory, create these benefits for us and then demand we comply to more of their requirements. So it could be things like you need a digital ID in order to participate in these programs. It could be things like you need to be vaccinated up to whatever our current definition of full vaccination is at the moment in time if you want to receive these goods and services from the government. So again, whenever someone says they're from the government and they're going to solve my problems, one, I want to immediately protect my pocketbook, and two, I want to look for the exits because I know that a clusterfuck is about to go down. Next was lowering housing costs. Again, understand every political party here ran on different platforms saying they were going to fix the housing crisis. Nothing's happened. In fact, housing just keeps going radically up. A few of the campaign promises the Trudeau Liberals made, they've already had the opportunity to implement, and they chose not to. Now, again, I don't think that those would have actually solved our housing crisis here, but at least they would be giving lip service to their own campaign promises, which I guess I would appreciate. Again, at least look us in the eyes when you're fucking us. Implement a home buyer's bill of rights, which would make home buying more transparent and tackle the financialization of the housing market by the end of 2023. Again, a home buyer's bill of rights, this is just going to create more bureaucracy, more red tape. I can imagine, a decade or two from now, you'll have to go before a housing board and make your case for where you land on the victim hierarchy in regards to what your, ESG score is going to be. And that'll determine whether you're able to rent that apartment or buy that apartment, or whether you need to, go into the slums. Again, government's not going to fix this. And the way we can tell government's not actually interested in fixing the housing crisis here is they're not actually looking at financial policies, right? They're not actually looking at deficit spending. They're not looking at printing press goes burr. Until we fix the money, this is all just lip service. This is all just a shell game of just trying to kick the can down the road so someone else gets blamed for it. And as long as it's not you and your political party, what's it matter, right? Next on climate, advanced measures to achieve significant emissions reductions by 2030 compared to 2005 levels, accelerate the trajectory to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. This is just not going to happen, but it will have a severe impact to our economy here in Canada. And there's consequences to these policies. And a lot of these consequences are unintended. Next was, and I'm just kind of highlighting a handful here, reconciliation makes significant, in quotes, whatever that means, investments in housing for Indigenous people in 2022. So I guess the government that can't get clean drinking water to all the First Nations reserves is somehow magically going to solve their housing crisis through significant investment. I mean, call me crazy, but why don't you fix the water if you can fix shit, Mr. Government? Tax system, change how financial institutions that have made strong profits during the COVID-19 pandemic are taxed. Yeah, that's really going to play out well. I don't believe it. And again, taxation isn't the issue here, right? It's the policies that allowed large corporations and financial institutions to dominate the Canadian economy that got us into this point in time. It's just like, you're literally just taking money from one pocket, putting it in the other here without actually trying. Like, this is treating symptoms rather than treating the underlying cause, right? You're not actually trying to prevent anything here. You're just trying to make yourself look good for voters. And honestly, I feel like at this point in time, the reason that we find ourselves with this agreement or coalition government is because I think Justin Trudeau wants to have something he can put his name or legacy to before he exits, right? And right now he couldn't exit politics unless it was in disgrace. And Jagmeet, I think Jagmeet just wants to make sure he gets his pension and some of his NDP cronies get their pensions because, you know, they love their pensions. And they know that they don't actually have the teeth to try and separate themselves from the Trudeau Liberals, the same way that honestly it seems like most mainstream conservatives don't have the teeth or the guts to try and separate themselves from the pack. And so what ends up happening is we're left with, like, you know, liberal extreme, which is the NDP, liberal, and then liberal light, which is the conservatives. So again, I think this is actually going to probably play out in Trudeau and the Liberals' favor, but I hope it plays out in Max's and PPC's favor even more. Then voting, they're going to work with Elections Canada to explore ways to expand the ability for people to vote through an expanded election day or 3 days of voting, allowing people to vote at any polling place within their electoral district and improving the process of mail-in ballots. We already covered it where there was thousands of mail-in ballots that ended up not being counted, that were delayed or whatever. Over 100,000 were sent out that weren't returned. Now, that doesn't mean that there was definitively shenanigans in our elections. But again, I guess the biggest question here is on the voting thing, in my opinion. Are you actually solving a real problem? And I don't think that you're solving a real problem. I don't think that the vast majority of Canadians didn't have the opportunity to go out and vote, right? In fact, if anything, I think had you made your policies more open and inclusive, right? Like not mandatory masks, not playing through the social distancing facade and all that, I think you would have actually even made it a smoother process for people that want to go vote. Now, at the same time, to me, voting is just a giant waste of time. We've kind of discussed this a few times in the past. I only voted once when I was 18. Glad that I got checked that off my bucket list, but after that, I realized it's mainly pointless. And understand that culture is always upstream of politics. So again, if we really want to change things, we actually need to focus on changing the culture first. From CBC News, they did an article here just highlighting different conservative pundits and the interim leader and their positions in regards to framing the Liberals' power grab after Trudeau made the deal with the NDP. So if you're interested in going down that rabbit hole, I encourage you to do so. I don't think there's anything jarring here or that really stands out in my opinion. Yeah, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Then from the National Post, radical left liberal NDP deal reeks of opportunism, Democratic backsliding on the genteel kind. Yeah, I don't disagree with Rupa here. For the last couple of years, living under a range of restrictions and limitations to individual liberty under the pandemic, many Canadians have had an inchoate sense, I'm not even sure what that word means, I'm going to need a thesaurus, but sense of a country in a state of drift, without a real sense of accountability for decisions made by politicians, whether federal or provincial, that profoundly affect people's lives and liberty, but against which there appears to be little or no recourse. Last fall's federal election didn't change anything. It gave us a repetition of the previous election, a parliament with a governing party that once again lost the popular vote, yet managed to rule with apparent great authority with a minority of seats. The Proof Strategies Can Trust Index, an annual survey of trust, found a 10% drop in trust in government between January 2021 and January 2022. And obviously that was actually before even the Freedom Convoy broke out in February. So the reason I just kind of wanted to highlight this is, yeah, I agree. I think that Canadians are just going to see this as more politicking, more focused on politicians, making sure they cover their ass, that they build themselves a legacy, and not really caring about what the voters want or what the voters wish to see accomplished through their government. So, yeah, again, I could take this in a black pill direction, but I think it's probably a net benefit because it's just going to kill a lot of false hopes that I saw people floating around. Kinsella breaking down motive for this undemocratic liberal NDP backroom deal. I just like the title or the subtitle here. They've got an axis of weasels, dirty deals gives Trudeau lots of runway to cobble together some sort of legacy achievement. And yeah, I really do think that that's the goal here from Trudeau's perspective is he doesn't want to be the honk prime minister. He wants to be a hero. I think that's why we see the grandstanding and the photo ops in regards to Ukraine right now. I think that that's why we see this coalition government. So, Kinsella makes some good points here about how backroom deals, regardless of their intentions or goals, it always looks shady and it's always going to feel sneaky and undemocratic. I agree with that. And he just comments here briefly about how we can forget about NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, because he's now officially and deservedly forgettable and irrelevant. Yeah, I pretty much agree. Again, anything they accomplish here will be pinned to Trudeau's lapel rather than to Jagmeet, in my opinion. Then Kinsella here breaks down 4 theories on why they decided to potentially do this, or why Trudeau and his government would decide to do this. The first one I completely disagree with here. I know that there is some polling that says that Jean Charest is apparently the best option for Conservatives to take back power. I don't believe it. Straight up. Don't believe you. Don't believe those pollsters. Maybe this is me being anti-facts or emotional, but I actually think Pierre Poilievre would get a lot more of the PPC vote, and that would be enough to potentially tip the Conservatives over. As well, I would have originally expected the NDP to get more votes as well. I think, if anything, the reason here is just to make the NDP party a completely lame duck for the next election. I think that serves the Liberals well. The second theory he has here is that the PMO staff was bored. I don't know if that was meant to be a joke or not, but I don't see why that would be the case for this agreement. The third one was measures. So Trudeau and Singh are planning something really, really big policy-wise. It may not be nationalizing banks or pharmaceutical companies, but one can be reasonably certain that it will be big lefty, dental care, more pharma care, more everything care, cradle to grave stuff, print more money, etc. Yeah, and again, the only reason I think he would choose to do that is honestly, he being Trudeau here, would be to have that legacy project. And then the fourth one he highlights here is a legacy project and positioning the Liberals to be in a better position in 2025. And unfortunately, I think he's right to a decent extent. I think that if the Liberals don't completely screw things up, and if the Conservatives decide to continue to be liberal light, again, outside of that chance of it radicalizing a lot of Conservatives and old school Liberals to start looking at the PPC party, I do think that it could give Trudeau's legacy a boost, as well as allow whoever comes in after Trudeau, whoever she may be, the opportunity to potentially become prime minister. One thing that I did want to highlight here, because whenever I can bring up the scandals of the Trudeau government, you guys know I'm going to take my shot. His only legacy to date, this is Trudeau, is the SNC-Lavalin scandal, the Aga Khan scandal, and the WE scandal. and lots of missteps and malproposisms that caused us people kind to wince. Yep, agree with that. Now switching gears here, but still another blue pill. This is just discussing what's going on with the interest rates and the coming financial consequences of our monetary policy that led us up to this precipice. So too long, didn't read. Bank of Canada is pushing Canada to a crisis. Brilliantly concise summary from Rob McLister. He's one of the most respected people in the mortgage industry, so writing him off as just a real estate bear complaining doesn't work. And so there's actually a great set of bullet points here. I'm just going to hit up on the first few, but I encourage you guys to check it out. Link in the video description down below. How do we know it's late? Because the central bank has never before begun a rate hike cycle with consumer price index inflation and eye-popping 300 basis points above prime rate, with both a pandemic and war limiting supplies of goods and services and spiking commodity prices, with unemployment near long-term lows, with consumers expecting rampant inflation. Those expectations have been completely de-anchored from the 2% target since late 2021, Scotiabank economists wrote on Tuesday, with U.S. inflation approaching the unthinkable double digits. Again, it's only unthinkable if you're not paying attention or if you only listen to the mainstream media. But again, if you guys want to read the full list there, McLister lays out, I encourage you to do so. Next, again, talking about mortgages and affordability here in Canada. This is from the Mortgage Professionals Canada. They're calling on the federal government to take action and implement new policies to make home buying more applicable for the middle class and new home buyers. Again, none of these policies are actually going to have long-term consequences. It's all just bread and circuses for the plebs. It's just to make you think they care about the unaffordable nature of housing in Canada. Many aspiring and middle-class Canadians continue to be excluded from the home ownership market, in part due to market conditions, but also as a result of the current regulatory framework for mortgage qualification and insurability. Mortgage Professionals Canada, MPC, is working with political decision makers to advocate for implementation of certain recent election promises by major political parties, which many agree will support first-time home buyers and grow Canada's middle class. I don't believe it. You're not going to actually fix the money, and we're not going to fix the fact that this is all just like a byproduct of the Cantillon effect, right? So those of you that have been orange pilled, you've probably already heard of this, but if you guys haven't, it's worth looking into. But the Cantillon effect is essentially the understanding that those that are closer to the printing presses or the central banks, they get richer and richer as central banks continue to bloat the monetary supply. So the closer you get to that printing press going burr, the richer you get. So you end up with these hedge funds, with companies like BlackRock, with like Brookfield here in Canada, and different organizations or corporations like that become wildly rich because they essentially get free money from the government or the central banks. Again, is there really a big difference there? Kind of, sort of, depends how you want to frame it. But they essentially get free money. They then go and compete with us regular folk that we don't have all the money in the world, and we don't get that money essentially for free. We actually at least do have some cost of capital when we're enacting this. We also don't get the benefits of being able to make behind the backdoor deals with regulators, because regulators don't care about the average person. So again, you want to create a bill of rights for home buyers. You want to create another program that creates more red tape that will allow someone to get their first home, but then essentially be anchored to that home because they'll never be able to upgrade or whatever the case may be. You want to create a program where the government becomes your partner in home ownership. Well, that kind of feels like it might be taking us down the slippery slope of us owning nothing, right? The moment the government, directly becomes your partner in real estate, it's bad enough that you're going to pay property taxes for the rest of your life. It's bad enough that CMHC insurance already distorts things. Adding more layers of bureaucracy onto this isn't actually going to be a net benefit. Will there be some edge case scenarios where some people will do better? Yeah, probably. And I'm sure they'll create some equity oriented programs where, as long as you can show that you're higher up on the victim hierarchy scale, maybe then you'll be able to, if you jump through enough hoops, be able to get that home and be partners with the government and owning it. But yeah, none of this is actually going to move the needle. And talking about inflation and what's going on here, I just want to highlight this great article from the Mises Institute. We've talked about the illusions of hedonics briefly in one of the other videos, where, again, understand hedonics here is when the government or when those in charge of reporting consumer price inflation or just any inflation. They decide to make qualitative judgments in order to essentially fudge the numbers. I don't know how else to frame it. Maybe at one point in time there was a little bit of logic behind this, but now it's just used to actually hide it's used to hide the bodies. So here's an example. A product like a refrigerator, for example, is not a refrigerator in the view of the BLS. Contrary to the act of use and consumption by the individual, and contrary to the fact that one normally buys the whole product and not only a few parts, the BLS calculates price changes on the basis that the refrigerator or a certain TV set or a CD player consists of various different parts or product features. While the BLS avoids claiming to know exactly how to calculate the pleasure that the whole product renders, the Bureau maintains that it is in a position to determine whether the electrical generator in the fridge has improved or not. This improvement then gets compared with a reference element of the product as it was earlier on the market. Depending on what the expert decides, the overall product receives a new price from the BLS that's different from the market price of the product. And yeah, and this is true for everything, right? So this is true for your automobiles. This is true for technology. So understand, when they're looking at like, oh, what's the cost of an iPhone today versus the cost of an iPhone 10 years ago? Sure, maybe it's double in fiat now, but they're going to argue it's got a better processor, it's got this, that, and the other, it's got more bells and whistles. And so because of that, we need to adjust the price down because you're actually getting more by buying this replacement phone. But for the average person, they're like, no, I actually just needed a replacement phone because it's, designed obsolescence. That's the word I was looking for. It's designed obsolescence, and we've got no real right to fix it. So the moment I open it up myself, it voids the warranty. So again, this is just all a song and dance to try and trick the average person into not fully understanding what inflation costs you. But I think those of us that actually understand economics, or those of us that are very low on the income, generating income here in Canada, you realize it because you realize that meat is a lot more expensive. And while they may tell you you can replace your meat with lentils or bugs or other low cost sources of protein, you're actually like, hey, you know what? Just because it's got the same grams of protein doesn't mean I'm getting the same bang for my buck or that I'm getting what I wanted here. I used to be able to afford this other thing, and now you're telling me, it really shouldn't matter to you. You're like, no, actually, as a consumer, I've got personal preferences, and that should actually be taken in consideration. So regardless of whether a car is faster or more efficient, or it's got, more bells and whistles, or it's got a screen in the thing, if that's the entry-level car, and I had an entry-level car, and I need to replace that entry-level car now, again, I'm viewing it as apples and apples, but where CPI comes into play, they start viewing it as apples and oranges. And once it's apples and oranges, they're able to then manipulate how it gets presented to the general public. And that's why it's so hard for us to really actually understand what the hell's going on with inflation, because you can't trust government numbers. It's quite obvious that hedonic imputations open the way to all kinds of manipulation. Given the implicit pressure that governments and central banks want to hear low inflation rates to be reported, due delivery would suggest to search mainly for quality improvements and to calculate these even when they are of a dubious nature. Yeah, 100% agree. Again, if you guys don't really understand what I was trying to explain with hedonics, I really do encourage you to read this article or give it a quick Google. Maybe there's some handy YouTube videos to break it down for you. But now let's talk about this article from Policy Options. So should it stay or go? Ottawa weighs the vaccine mandate for the public service. And this brings us into our first red pill story of the day. This has nothing to do with safety. At this point in time, I believe it's like 98% of public workers, I think they reference here in the article, are vaccinated, at least 2 doses. So this isn't about safety. We've already seen most provincial governments open up or, remove their mandates and restrictions. Here in Ontario, technically, you're allowed to go out and not wear a mask even. Could you imagine the government giving you such a freedom? I'd love to hear from you guys. What are you personally seeing when you go out there into crowds of the grocery store, the bank, wherever? Are people actually using that freedom, or are they so cuckolded by mainstream media and politicians fear-mongering that they still are wearing face diapers? I'd love to hear what your personal experiences are, because I barely go out into society because what's society really got to offer me at this point in time? But my biggest concern about this is essentially this is actually all being done in order just to purge free thinkers, libertarian-oriented individuals, anyone that would disagree with whatever the narrative presented by the administration is. That's what they're actually doing here, right? And that's what we saw with mandates for hospital workers, for firefighters, for policemen. This had nothing really to do with their safety or their health. This all had to do with political grandstanding and trying to purge political opponents from any sort of federal employment. So this is scary, and this is just one more reason why we need to focus on building parallel institutions here in Canada rather than trying to fix what's clearly a very broken system. I think a whole cloth strategy makes a lot more sense at this point in time, and parallel institutions is a great start. From CTV News, controversial bylaw having negative impact on Prince George's homeless population, report finds. And this feels kind of like a clown pill story, but the city of Prince George is facing criticism for its Safe Streets bylaw, brought in last year to deal with complaints about needles, human excrement, and blocked entrances in some neighborhoods. It makes it an offense to solicit within 10 meters of a restaurant, daycare, liquor store, or a vehicle at a traffic stop, among other places. Open air burning in a park or a street is also among prohibited activities. I guess this immediately just makes me ask some questions, like, wouldn't soliciting just be illegal anyways? So, like, is this just that they're actually going to enforce it? Because, like, I don't understand. Can you just solicit anywhere in Prince George? And so this is now being a restriction. And if so, is forcing them 30 meters away from these sort of places that bad of a thing? I don't really understand it. Although it is interesting because it makes it sound like you could solicit in residential areas, just not like near businesses or daycares or liquor stores or stoplights, which is strange. And then open air burning in a park or a street is also among prohibited activities. Again, I would have thought this was already prohibited, unless like it's a park where they allow you to have campfires or something like that. But I think they're talking about urban parks, right? And yeah, I didn't think you could have a fire on the street anyways. So I don't know. It just seems bizarre. And then it goes on. A report from the co-chair of the University of Toronto Sociology Department found in the first few months, no tickets were issued. So understand this. Despite the fact that no tickets were issued under these new bylaws, they're saying that, you know, it puts undue stress and harm upon the homeless. However, the report author says in many cases, people were told to move no matter what their conditions were and whether they had any place to go. In that way, the bylaw was punitive, he said. I mean, I guess, but like, wouldn't that just mean that like any rule or regulation that like people are forced to abide by is punitive, right? Like, yeah, I shot that dude, but like you shouldn't blame me for it because I wanted to shoot the dude. I don't know. It just seems bizarre the way this is being framed. I also kind of feel like this is mainly a nothing burger, but understand that this step, this normalization of people shitting on the streets, on having needles on your corners, on people soliciting anywhere and everywhere in your city, this is leading us down the slippery slope that is the hellscape that appears to be like San Francisco or Los Angeles or parts of New York at this point in time. Is that what we want as Canadians? I'm a hard pass personally. Regional Chief Terry Teague said about 70% of Prince George's homeless population was Indigenous and about half were former youth in care. And this is obviously a complex situation. I'm not sure if in theory it should really matter who the people are that are homeless and that are being impacted by these rules and regulations. Again, it's either wrong to do it against any Canadian citizen or it's not. Their race, their creed, their belief system really shouldn't play a factor, in my opinion, here. And when we're looking at the homeless situations or issues here, I think it's important to understand that we need to like part this out into multiple different categories, right? There's a mental health crisis that's going on. A lot of that, I would argue, was compounded based upon what happened over the last 2 years, based upon government regulations. But also there's a certain part of this, which is the infantization of the average person, right? Like everyone now just believes they should turn to daddy government and daddy government should solve all their problems, their needs and their wants. And because of that, I think that we set people up for failure. I think that we create this hierarchy of victimhood where people think, well, as long as I land high up enough, you know, society owes me this. And it shouldn't be, right? Like it should be that we're teaching people that you actually get real personal benefit from trying to improve your lot in life, that you can actually take control of your life, that you don't need the government to be in control of every aspect of your life, and you can find and create solutions for yourselves. And I think we don't have exactly a two-state system here in Canada in regards to Canada and First Nations reserves, but I think that we do. I personally know that we do a giant disservice to everyone involved by having this quasi two-state solution here. No one's ever going to completely overhaul the First Nations Act, and it's honestly to the detriment of everyone involved because a ton of money gets wasted and no results actually happen. So again, that's my take on this red pill story. Let's keep rolling here. I've dragged this on a decent amount, but we're just going to go long tonight. Increased risk of type 2 diabetes linked to COVID-19 study finds. Now, I didn't see anything here that spelled out whether there's a correlation or causation kind of going on. If I had to jump to conclusions on this, I would put forward a theory that, hey, maybe it's the people that are most impacted by COVID that were already at risk of diabetes. And I don't think that that's a leap too far based upon what we know so far about those that were at highest risk of COVID-19. So again, maybe it does weaken your immune system and, creates the onset of that type 2 diabetes earlier or quicker than it otherwise would have occurred. But it's kind of confusing the way this is framed, in my opinion. And I just want to highlight a couple points here. So, however, the researchers say it's still not clear whether diabetes becomes apparent during COVID-19 infection due to immune activation or stress. It's also unclear whether post-COVID-19 diabetes may be reversed after a full recovery from infection. The researchers suggest anyone who has or had COVID-19 should be on the lookout for warning signs and possible symptoms of diabetes, such as fatigue, frequent urination, and increased thirst. So I'm sure we'll get more information as the months pass here, but just wanted to kind of highlight that story because it's not something I'm seeing everywhere on the internet. So wanted to share it with you guys. Next, this is from Blacklock's Reporter. And again, really encourage you guys to support them. I think they're doing some of the best reporting here in Canada. And I think they deserve your Canadian loonies. So no media blacklist, Freeland said. And so we covered this story already in the past where essentially literally on a hot mic, we had the Bank of Canada saying that they gave preferential treatment to reporters they liked and that they would avoid talking to reporters like Blacklock's here. Well, literally pretty much like the way someone could interest me as a reporter would be like, yeah, you know what? The federal government doesn't like me. The stooges in the administration, they try and marginalize us. I'd be like, okay, I'm listening. Go on. I actually want to support you now, rather than the CBC, which I'm forced to at gunpoint because they literally use our tax dollars for it. And if you don't pay your taxes, they'll eventually come and take you. No media blacklist, Freeland. So Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland yesterday said Bank of Canada's disclosure of a media enemies list was an isolated occurrence. Blacklock's recorded a bank manager stating authorities would not be allowing Blacklocks to be asking questions while giving preferential treatment to Bloomberg News. Honestly, I don't believe you, Chrystia Freeland. Why should we, right? This to me is more an example of essentially the culture in the administration, right? We've already seen our prime minister demonize anyone that disagrees with him. Why wouldn't we think that permeates his entire administration? Why wouldn't we think that permeates the entire any and all federal organizations? Yeah, I don't believe you. Now from Le Devoir, this was just a study that found 56% of Quebecois or Quebecers essentially believe that mainstream media, that the press is trying to mislead you. And honestly, I just got to say, what's wrong with the other 46%? You guys need to catch up with the times. Next from Louder with Crowder, Disney. Conservative Disney employees write open letter condemning political hostile work environment. Well, it's good to see in theory, conservatives in the workforce or just freedom-oriented individuals or anyone that just isn't willing to go, lock and step with the dogma from progressives or the NPCs of this era. I also think that, honestly, corporations like Disney, they're not going to change. So I think we're much better those of you that like, not that anyone from Disney's watching this right now, but if you work for an organization that's involved in creating culture, content, things of that nature, if your organization doesn't respect your political views, if they only want to toe one side of the equation or one side of the narrative, if you want to fight them, great, more power to you. I think you should be allowed to. I think you should be allowed to write letters like this and complain about your work environment. But I honestly think that you'll be better off if you try and go and build parallel institutions. And I think we're seeing lots of success in regards to this, right? Like whether we're looking at what Glenn Beck started with The Blaze, whether you're looking at the Daily Wire, and like they're getting into movie production now. I just saw I think the Daily Wire also launched a competitor to Harry's Razors because they dropped advertising with the Daily Wire because of a disagreement in political views. And so Daily Wire decided, we'll start a razor company. I think we need to see more of that. And more often, all of us have a responsibility. Again, technically, I think it's on the left and the right to vote with your dollars, right? If you actually hate what's going on in China, we probably need to stop buying so much shit from China and from Amazon. If we hate the fact that right now so many businesses were willing to demonize and try and just like throw out their employees if they wouldn't get vaccinated, we need to try and go and find other companies to support that are actually freedom oriented, or we need to take responsibility and create those organizations. Maybe it's certainly going to be the path less traveled, but if we actually want a better future, no politician's going to give us a better future, not even Max, right? PPC maybe will slow the spread of the virus, the cancer that is government, but it won't stop it dead in its tracks. We actually just need to fix the culture. And we need to fix the money. Actually, it turns out we need to fix a lot of things in society. Next from the Counter Signal, and this brings me into our first Black Bill story of the day. This is Ontario pushes forward with critical race theory. So this was Bill 67, if I remember correctly here. And this is important to understand because this is, Bill 67, which shoehorns critical race theory into Ontario K-12 classrooms. And this is really worth reading from cover to cover. It's from the Counter Signal, but I'm just going to highlight a few points here. We've talked briefly about neo-Marxism and critical race theory in the past, but this is important because 5-10 years from now, like this is my personal hot take. This is just a prediction. Personally, I think within 10 years, we're going to see it normalized. People having to write confessions about their privilege. We're going to see it, and this is going to be in the education system. It's also going to be in the employment field, but we're going to see it normalized where you're going to have to write confessions for your privilege, where you're going to have to denounce your race if you're white, where you're going to have to admit that you're inherently biased and racist as a white person. And this isn't me trying to break out, the world's smallest violin for white people. I just think it's a reality of critical race theory. So highlighting a few points from this. And again, if you guys ever want to really go deep down that rabbit hole, you need to go check out James Lindsay. We've highlighted them in the past here on this channel. If passed, the only way teachers can get hired and advance their careers is if they can prove they obeyed the radical far left ideology. For example, teachers would need to show that they teach children according to the racist critical race theory in classrooms as young as kindergarten. The impact this would have on kids is sickening and morally backwards, Haskell claims. Critical race theory, CRT, is a collectivist ideology that reduces people down to their skin color and advocates presuming qualities on the basis of presupposed genetic markers for good or evil. CRT proponents say no racism exists or even can exist towards white people. White people are inherently racist and must unlearn racist biases. The impact on students would be soul-crushing, Haskell says. Jordan Peterson also put out a video on March 13th about this. I encourage you guys to go watch that as well. There's a link in the video description down below through this article. So honestly, I know it's a tough job being a parent in this day and age. I know that you've got a lot of shit on your plate. Mad respect to the parents out there, but every parent needs to get more involved in their child's education. If you're not homeschooling, you need to make sure that you're having conversations about what your kid's learning in school. What we see going on right now in the more progressive states and education systems in the United States is literally critical race theory being taught in the classroom, And then the children are told not to tell their parents what they're learning, right? Where the teachers are literally trying to obfuscate what's being taught in the classroom, where they don't think that you as a parent should have the right to dictate what's being taught to your children. And this is a principle. This is a trajectory we're on that's not going to change. Honestly, like, the post-secondary institutions have completely capitulated to wokeism, to critical race theory, to all this bullshit, and it's not going to get better. Again, the only way it's going to get better is if we build those parallel institutions. Next from CBC, we think there are thousands of victims. Is Peter Nygaard the worst of the worst? And all I want to highlight here is, like, yeah, terrible person. There's a lot of elites that are terrible people. It seems to, again, maybe it's just a coincidence, but it seems like a lot of powerful people are naturally drawn to power so that they can abuse others, or maybe you get corrupted because, we've heard absolute power corrupts absolutely. But what I did want to highlight was, this is framed originally as it was shocking, these revelations, right, of a vast decades-long criminal conspiracy involving one of Canada's most prominent entrepreneurs. At this point in time, my question is, why would this be shocking, right? We've had Epstein. We can look back in time to things like the Franklin cover-up. This permeates so much of our institutions and elites that I honestly, this is a black pill story to me. Not because what he did was evil, but it was evil, but more because if you're in the mainstream press, if your job is a journalist and you're shocked by the fact that these elites are corrupted and they do terrible things, like, you're not a journalist. You're just a part of a propaganda wing, right? And they talk about how there was rumors and stories from the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, but it wasn't until like 2010 that someone finally started doing a deep dive into this. Again, like, we as a culture, we all have a responsibility here, but I think journalists even have a greater responsibility. But all of us need to shun this behavior, right? Like, this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. People see it, right? People hear rumors, people hear stories, and they choose to look the other way or dismiss it because it would be inconvenient or awkward to actually approach this subject matter. We've all got a responsibility to speak out when we see something that's wrong. Next from Rebel News, reporter Savannah Hernandez suspended from Twitter after viral Leah Thomas coverage. I'm a fan of Sav. Originally got kind of exposed to her through Elijah Schaefer's Slightly Offensive, where she was the producer on it. She recently broke off to start doing her own thing, and one of the first things she did was go down and start interviewing people at the NCAA event that were featuring transgender swimmer Leah Thomas. And she literally just shared interviews of people, asking people for their opinion, and it turns out not everyone was like, oh, this is so brave and so beautiful, and we should all just bow down to Leah Thomas, and let's make her the greatest female athlete of all time. Turns out some people were like, yeah, no, this seems like bullshit. And she literally got her account suspended for reporting. Again, we saw the Babylon Bee yesterday get suspended because they made a joke about how a transgender person who was biologically male won, Female of the Year. And they made a joke that they could have won Male of the Year. And that's enough. Again, a parody, the Babylon Bee, getting suspended for this. So you can't report the truth. You can't make fun of facts. Like, there's no middle ground here. Again, that's why I think things like Rumble, things like Gab are becoming more and more important and relevant in this day and age during these culture wars. Next from Blacklock's reporters, Kabul unsafe for me, envoy. This is really worth reading cover to cover. I'm not going to read too much from it, but this is essentially talking about how we saw diplomats in Afghanistan decide to leave while there were still 1,250 Canadians left behind. And not a single diplomat was left at the Kabul airport, right? And their argument was, it was dangerous. Yeah, okay. Isn't that partly what you signed up for, right? As being a foreign dignitary, as being a diplomat, as being an envoy? Again, they only want it when it's good times, when it's easy, when they get paid big bucks. But like, oh, I'm not actually going to risk my life, right? Like, it feels like in this day and age, we would literally see people, the idea of when the Titanic was sinking, women and children first. I literally feel at this point in time, we would see diplomats and envoys and people from the administration be like, no, I'm too important to die. You know, like, what's that kid done for society? I need to get on this plane. And so, you know, again, understand that this envoy has avoided coming before Parliament since, when did this all happen? Like mid-August? Yeah. So we're literally now mid-March. So it didn't take a full year for him to get in front of Parliament, but it got kind of close to it, didn't it? Like, we're, you know, past 6 months here. And honestly, I just get the sense of entitlement here. I encourage you guys, again, get that Blacklock's membership and go read the full article. True North federal panel event discusses digital IDs for tracking future vaccinations. This is all bad. Digital IDs, hard pass, hard no. Just say no to digital IDs, people. Next, again, I'm still rocking my red and white health card. This is from the Counter Signal. Climate lockdowns are coming soon. This is actually just going to be a fact as well, particularly if we see the NDPs and the Liberals focus on emissions by 2050. Without some, you know, miracle science, some miracle invention, it's just not going to play out that way. And it doesn't have to play out this way. This is climate alarmism, right? Again, we can both look and try going on without having to jump to the most extreme circumstances or edge case potentials, right? And that's what happens with everything, right? That's what happened with the war in Iraq. That's what's happening right now with Ukraine. It's what happened with COVID. It's what's going to happen with climate change. Goddamn. Just don't we get tired of repeating history? Doesn't anyone get tired of this shit? Now let's move on to a couple clown pill stories. I kind of found this funny. I'd love to get your guys' hot take. Love it or leave it. Toronto teams up with Justin Bieber for new jerseys. The black and blue one doesn't seem terrible to me. I actually really dislike the yellow and black one. So just thought I'd share that with you guys because it really doesn't matter. But love to get your thoughts and opinions on that. But again, understand your tax dollars are supporting this important journalism from the CBC. I'd much rather see like Toronto St. Pat's, a new jersey for that. Montreal City Councillor blasts Ukrainian anthem in front of Russian consulate. Man, so brave. This is fucking clown world. Let's keep rolling here. And this is, stay with me here. This is a white pill. How did this end up in my white pills? Actually, no, this was supposed to be a black pill. But feds to cool decriminalizing heroin. Again, technically, my libertarian bent or my anarchist bent, really, these days, lends me towards like, yeah, all drugs should be legal. And again, you shouldn't need prescription to get your hands on anything, although it would be a rough ride for society. But what really stood out to me was I forgot that we had an addictions minister. And that really tells us where we are at as a society, right? So this is a new position that was created at the end of 2021 because our policies from all the crazy COVID lockdowns created a mental health crisis, and we saw overdoses increasing drastically across the board, across Canada, right? We covered one story in regards to BC, where over 6,600 people had overdosed since the start of COVID lockdowns. There are serious consequences here, particularly in relation to opiates, and I'm sorry that somehow got into my white pill stories. But here is a white pill. And again, it's sometimes hard for me to find white pills, but this is from Blacklock's reporter. And this is the government paying $27 million for an Arctic reactor. So essentially, it's not exactly like a nuclear reactor, if I understand correctly. This is like a nuclear battery is what they compare it to. I think that this is a net good thing. Based upon my understanding of nuclear energy, if we're going to try and create these crazy green policies, I don't see how we get any sort of viable solutions without nuclear. So, hey, I'm going to count this as a win. At least Canada is not completely writing off all nuclear power sources. From the Counter Signal, U of T professors file lawsuit against, or a human rights case against the university because they're still implementing their tyrannical rules around COVID, despite the fact that the province has opened up. Again, I'm glad to see it. It's hard for me to come up with white pills sometimes, guys. So if you guys have good suggestions for white pills, you can always join the Problems for Profits Discord. Link in the video description down below. I'd love it if you guys would share with me white pill stories in the Maple Pill channel. So really encourage you guys to go do that. But let's jump over to a couple memes of the day. So this first one from Saudi Agoras, money doesn't buy happiness. Me. Bullets, guns, and a pimpin' homestead. That seems pretty cool in my opinion. That may not be happiness, but it's darn close. And then I actually just wanted to share this video because it put a smile on my face. This is a black bear breaking into a pig pen and pigs saying hell no. So you can literally see the pig going after the bear there. Another pig comes out, chases the bear, and like this bear looks scared. You can literally see he's up on his hind legs, and then he jumps over the fence and runs, and the pig chases him a bit. So not really a meme, but I knew I didn't give you a lot of white pills, so I thought I'd share that. And then finally, I wanted to highlight, I'm going to start uploading certain content early to Rumble and BitChute. And again, links to those channels in the video description down below. I recently just uploaded a new series we're going to be doing here on the channel called Maple Pill Conversations. This one's with my good buddy Andrew Hines, who's a Canadian real estate investor and a fellow thought criminal. And we spend essentially an hour and a half, almost hour and 3/4, just chatting about our perspectives on the world, what we're trying to do to put ourselves in a better position, and trying to take a realist approach to what's going to happen next in Canada. I hope you guys enjoy that conversation. I hope you get value from it, the same way that I hope you get value from everything we do here. I will be uploading this, I think, to YouTube and Facebook later in the week, but again, I'm going to be posting new and fresh content on Rumble and BitChute early, outside of just the daily Maple Pills, because I want to slowly start getting you guys and myself trained to migrate to these other platforms, because let's be honest, my days are numbered on YouTube, but I would really like to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube before we get banned here. So if you guys haven't already liked this video, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, it would be much appreciated if you did so. If you guys want to follow along with me on Instagram, it's Matt McKeever Unfiltered. Again, appreciate you guys following me wherever you do on social media. And I really do appreciate you guys making this a two-way conversation by jumping in that comment section. So I'm going to pull that up quick. And actually, we wrapped those last few stories pretty good. I thought this was going to end up being an hour and a half show. So again, we've got Terry saying, oh, the NDP joining the Liberals. No one voted for that. 100% agree. Farzana, shameful way to gain power. Yep. We got Benjamin in the chat. Appreciate you. Sandra saying, I tried Discord and wasn't able to get it. Sorry to hear that, Sandra. Maybe try the link in this video. Again, I really do encourage you guys to check out Discord. You'll obviously need the Discord app on your computer or on your cell phone in order to access it. One of the reasons that I've set up the Discord is just there's conversations that we can't have here on YouTube where I'm just going to get banned as well. It's hard to have long form conversations here through the chat and just me live streaming. So again, it's a spot for me to share stories, for you guys to share stories, share memes. There's also a lot of white pill content there where we're talking about, homesteading, sharing resources, homeschooling, all that good stuff. We got Step. Hey, Matt, I'm going to have to catch the replay, and don't forget to hit the like button. Appreciate it. We've got Graham in the chat. Hey, what's up, Graham? Bang, Frick. Danny, hey, crew. Appreciate you in the chat there, Danny. April Simmons, good to see you. The holders of the Nazi flag and Confederate flag were asked to leave by the truckers, from what I understand. Yep, that's my understanding too, or at least that's what was reported by the original protesters. Bang says, it's so unfair that they can create such damage with wrong headlines and accusations, and then 2 weeks later, with a smaller headline, correct it, but the majority already absorbed the info. Yeah, I completely agree. And in this case, it's even so much more severe, because it's not just the fact that there was some fake news presented. It's that our politicians then were used that to essentially implement unprecedented rules and restrictions on Canadians and start freezing bank accounts, right? And again, call me a conspiracy theorist if you want. I wear that like a badge of honor these days. But I really do believe a dangerous precedent was set. And we're going to see the normalization of financial penalties against political opponents, particularly now that Trudeau is going to be feeling comfy and safe with his NDP backing and going into 2025. Yeah, don't like that. Do not like that whatsoever. Danny says, you cannot wake people that do not want to be waken up or want to admit they were fooled. It is. It's tough. And I think all we can do is try and present our arguments in rational, logical manners, try and shine light on the truth whenever possible. But you're right. If someone doesn't want to change, they're not going to change, right? Change comes from within. April Simmons, LOL, dressed in blackface. Very short list. Appreciate it. Danny, nothing that the government touches works well. Yeah, and again, a lot of us are indoctrinated through, decades of education system to believe that the government actually does solve a lot of problems. But the moment you go more than surface deep on these subject matters, you start to realize like, oh, well, like that new Band-Aid that stopped the bleeding or was triage for this situation, well, the government technically caused that situation, right? Again, this is the case with almost every foreign conflict that we've got into since World War II. And you could even make a strong argument that monetary policies from the US and Britain led us into even World War I. So again, the more we dive into this, just the harder it is to not want to question everything. And that's why, again, I think us building parallel institutions is the answer. Debbie says, smart man you are. Appreciate it, Debbie. I'd be okay with pharma companies making tons of money if it wasn't put back into, or if it was put back into important research that's transparent to the public. Yeah, and at the same time, I personally think that a better solution would look like literally getting rid of all intellectual property laws. I know that's a radical idea, but I don't think people should be able to own ideas. I don't think they should be able to own chemical formulations or biological organisms or anything like that. Again, like you can own a cow, but I don't think that you can own like the DNA of that cow. And it would be a completely radically different reality if we didn't have intellectual property laws. But I actually do have faith in the average educated person, right? And people would essentially have a greater responsibility to self-fund a lot of things. So I think we'd see a lot of non-government organizations, a lot of charities creep up to fundraise to try and solve a lot of medical issues. We kind of already have it. But the issue here is, again, those entities are even sometimes directly and indirectly competing with the government and with government-favored organizations. And so that creates such a murky fog of war or dirties the water so much that it's very difficult to actually see that kind of what I'm even like thinking about is possible. But I really do think it is possible. But I agree, Terry, at least it would be nice if they use those crazy profits to reinvest into research. But understand that the way our modern economy is structured, the way monetary policy is, the incentives just aren't there, right? The incentives are to actually buy the rights to something and then milk it for all it's worth. Literally what we saw with like Pharma Bro, right? Back in 2015, 2016. Good night, Matt. Always a pleasure. Appreciate it, Danny. Justin DeSec. Hey, what's up, Justin? Sounds like Justin's down to eat those bugs. So, hey, Justin, you're welcome to have my portion or share as well. William Devine, in Toronto, 75% of people are still wearing masks. That's so gross, but appreciate you sharing. Terry, it is so hard to avoid planned obsolescence these days. I still hang my laundry to dry and burn my collected wood for heat. That's awesome, Terry. And again, we've already seen like they've outlawed wood fireplaces in Montreal, right? And again, if I want to be give the benefit of the doubt, I can see how unintended consequences and policies led them to that decision. But it's also hard for me to not want to jump to conclusions and say like they just want you to be more dependent on their systems, right? Their supply chains, and they don't want to see independence available for the average citizen. So again, I'm actually looking to install a bunch of wood burning fireplaces here at the Citadel because right now we don't have any, and it's silly because I'm surrounded by woods. I've got 20 acres here. William Devine, seems like less people are wearing them even compared to yesterday, though. That's great to hear, William. And again, I think each one of us serves as an example by making the choice to potentially, have that dangerous social judgment moment by not wearing our masks when we go out, right? I think we set the example. I've personally experienced this even before the mask mandates were pulled. I can remember, in this summer, going to my local variety store and like I would make a habit of holding the door open for someone, whether I was coming in or out without wearing a mask. And I would see people sometimes like reaching into their pocket, pull out their mask, and then they would see that I didn't have it and they'd be like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll put it back. Again, so many people just don't want social judgment. And while I get why that was probably ingrained upon us, millennia ago. We need to outgrow that, right? At least to a certain extent. Again, social pressures and social cohesion has its purpose and does have value, but only when backed up by reason and logic. April Simmons, they are still wearing face masks. I was thinking a hockey mask would be more suitable to go out in public with. Farzana says, Mississauga, it's still nice to not be the only maskless person now. It is nice. And I think we need to normalize smiles again in public. And that's never going to be done without getting rid of the silly masks. Donna Jean, about 90% of people in the No Frills grocery store and in home hardware were not wearing a mask. None of the staff had masks and they were smiling. That's fantastic to hear and appreciate you sharing that, Donna. That's good. William says, I also live in Parkdale where people love masks. Yeah, and I think this is very much a regional situation, right? I think every region is going to have a different reaction to it. Again, those that want to wear masks, technically, they should be more than allowed to wear those masks. I can't think that without the social conditioning and training over the last 2 years that most people would actually still want to wear a mask. It's really for the virtue signaling, in my opinion. Rad says, yeah, I see kids wearing masks even outside. I don't get it. Yeah, when I see people like walking by themselves outside with a mask, like wild to me. Do not let your children near the public school system. 100% agree with that if at all possible. And again, it may not be practical for everyone, but if for whatever reason you feel compelled or like you need to have your children go to the public school system, I think you really have a duty to make sure you understand what they're learning and that you're having conversations with them about what they're learning. Because while not all teachers are bastards, there's too many of them that are. Rat says, Matt, have a house renewal coming up on December. Financially, would you recommend a fixed rate, variable, or sell the house? Really a personal decision based upon your financial position, Raz. I guess what I would encourage you to do is really think about what your goals are long term and try and make sure that whatever choice you make is in alignment with that. Now, on the choice of like, I'm not going to tell you whether sell or keep the house, but if you decide to keep it, I would be if you just want certainty, I would be tempted to get a fixed rate. Right now, again, historically speaking, traditionally speaking, you've always been better off to get a variable rate, and that very well could be the truth in the future as well. Again, no one can predict the future accurately. However, based upon the facts available to us, I would suspect and expect to continue to see interest rates increase, just not as rapidly as what the mainstream media was originally preaching at the start of the year, and their fancy experts and pundits. Farzana, why are white people not paying attention to what's happening and talking against Bill 67? Yeah, I really think that I don't think it's a white person thing. I think it's everyone, because I didn't hit upon it in the story, but I think there's also this, like, it does a disservice to individuals that actually earn their place, right? And so I don't think that, like, I think that this racism of low expectations, right, from people that are visible minorities, I think it really does do a disservice to everything. Like, there are so many visible minorities here in Canada that, are first, second, third generation immigrants, and they've earned every single thing they've got. And I think there's also other people that expect everything to be given to them in this country. I don't give a shit about your race, your religion, or anything like that. If you're willing to take ownership over your individual life, if you're taking responsibility for your health, for your financial, for your family and social bonds, that's what I want to see from my fellow Canadian citizens. I don't want to see the demonization of one race or people, and I don't want to see this hierarchy of victimhood, right? Like, we covered it in the story yesterday about CIBC wanting to hire an Indigenous person, and like these weird unintended consequences of like, we'll do a traditional dance and regalia and maybe have backup dancers in the video you make for us. And like, the way my brain works, I'm like, that sounds super racist, bro, that you're literally like, dance for me, minority. And it's just like, no, maybe you should just find out if they're qualified and hire the best qualified candidate, regardless of their race, regardless of their religion. And the fact that that could even be a controversial perspective these days tells you everything we need to know about where society is. Aislinn says, I'm very close to abandoning you on YouTube in favor of watching you on Rumble so I can vote with my dollars and support a more freedom-aligned platform. I'll miss the live comment section, though. Yeah, and honestly, part of it's just I need to do some research and figure out how I can get access to Rumble live chats, to YouTube, Facebook, and any other platform that I decide to live stream on. But yeah. Terry says, thanks again. Good show. Appreciate it. Free faster from Starlink today. Due to excessive levels of inflation, the price of Starlink kit is increasing from $649 to $699 for deposit holders and $759 for all new orders effective today. Interesting. Appreciate you sharing that. The price will increase from $129 to $140. The new price will apply to your subscription on 6/4/2022. Interesting. I think I'll have to check this. I'm pretty sure I was already paying $140, so I don't know if I got hosed there or what, but I'm almost positive that I thought they were charging me like 110 or 120 American, and it always worked out to like 140 and change, but maybe I'm misremembering. But 8.5% increase. They are smart enough to know the real inflation rate is higher than the government tells us. 100% agree. U.S. price increase from 99 to 110 a month, 11.1% increase. Interesting. You've really got me thinking now. Maybe I am paying 129, and then with HST it works out to 140 something. Either way, it's the only internet option I've got, so it's my favorite internet option. And so far, it's been very reliable for us up here at the Citadel. So again, appreciate you guys jumping in, making this a two-way conversation. Really do appreciate those of you that take the time to smash the like button, hit subscribe, share this on social media, because we know big tech's going to do me no favors in the algorithms, and they don't owe me that. But it would be nice to not just disappear through the cracks all the time. But again, appreciate you guys watching this video. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Maple Pill, same time, same place. And yeah, we'll play ourselves out here with the Maple Pill intro song.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I'll have my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Web fire, math, evil scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my